The scream of wagon wheels tore through the dry Texas morning like something wounded, and by the time the dust settled, one man was dead, one woman was alone, and a little boy who had never met her would unknowingly begin changing all their lives. Mill Creek, Texas, carried its own unwritten law. Folks minded their own troubles. The land was too harsh and the seasons too cruel for anything else. Men worried about cattle, fences, drought, and debt. Women kept homes standing through storms and sorrow. Nobody wandered into another soul's business unless invited. That was how people survived out here. And for 36 years, Wade Mercer had followed that rule without question. Wade owned a modest ranch east of town, where the grass fought stubbornly against the dust, and the cattle knew his whistle better than most men knew prayer. He was broad-shouldered, quiet, and steady in the way weathered men become after life removes every unnecessary word. 2 years earlier, fever had taken his wife, Clara, quickly and without mercy. Since then, Wade lived inside routine. He rose before daylight, worked until dark, and raised his 5-year-old son, Luke, with the careful determination of a man building walls around grief so it could not swallow him whole. Luke carried his mother's pale hair and his father's watchful silence. He was not loud like other children. He studied things first, thought long and hard, and then spoke with a strange honesty that unsettled grown folks more than they admitted. Wade brought him into town every Saturday for supplies. It was during one of those Saturdays that he first noticed her. She sat alone outside Turner's general store, hands folded around a faded cloth bag, staring across the street with the distant look of someone wrestling numbers that refused to add up. People in Mill Creek did not sit idle on the boardwalk. You walked with purpose or stayed home. Sitting meant trouble. She looked young, perhaps 25, with dark curls pinned loosely and a plain green dress repaired carefully along the sleeves with thread that did not quite match. Wade noticed her for half a second and looked away. He had feed to collect and Luke waiting near the hitching rail. It was none of his concern. A week later, she appeared again, this time near the post office bench. Same careful clothes, same tired stillness, same expression that reminded Wade too much of nights spent alone after Clara died, staring at walls and calculating how to keep moving forward when half your world had stopped. He walked past her without slowing. Luke held his hand as they crossed the boardwalk toward the store. Wade had almost reached the door when the boy stopped completely. Wade took 2 steps before realizing the small hand had slipped free. He turned back. Luke stood motionless, studying the woman with solemn concentration. She looked up and gave him a cautious smile, soft and uncertain. "Hello?" she said. Luke continued studying her. Wade already recognized the dangerous look forming on his son's face. The one that meant honesty was about to arrive uninvited. "Luke," Wade warned gently, but the boy asked anyway, "Are you lonely?" The boardwalk went strangely quiet. Wade closed his eyes for a second, wishing the ground might kindly swallow him whole. The woman's smile trembled but did not disappear. Instead, something deeper appeared behind it. "Sometimes," she answered truthfully. Luke nodded as if considering important evidence. "My pa was lonely too," he said. Wade felt heat rise into his face. The woman's eyes shifted toward him, not with pity but with quiet understanding that unsettled him far more. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Wade cleared his throat and lifted Luke into his arms before more truth could escape. "Sorry to bother you, ma'am." "You didn't," she replied. Wade nodded once and carried Luke toward his horse, focusing on tightening saddlebags and adjusting straps with more attention than necessary. Yet while he worked, he felt the weight of that small exchange sitting somewhere beneath his ribs. By the time he looked back, she had disappeared inside the store. He rode home telling himself to forget about it. He nearly succeeded. But in towns like Mill Creek, stories traveled faster than horses. 3 days later, Mrs. Bennet at the post office supplied the missing pieces without being asked. Her name was Evelyn Hart. She had arrived from Kansas 6 weeks earlier after losing her husband in a wagon accident during the journey south. Alone, nearly broke, and carrying little beyond sewing tools and determination, she rented a small room above the laundry and survived on mending work. "Hard-working girl," Mrs. Bennet declared while sorting mail. "Keeps her head down, never asks for charity." Then she peered over her spectacles. "Just needs someone willing to see her proper." Wade bought his stamps and left without answering. But all evening, while the Texas sky burned red above his ranch, he kept remembering Luke's question on the boardwalk, and the way the woman had answered it honestly. For 4 days, Wade Mercer carried the thought around like a stone in his pocket, heavy enough to notice and impossible to ignore. He told himself the woman in town was none of his concern. Mill Creek survived because people respected distance. But distance had become a habit in his life, and lately he was beginning to wonder if habit and loneliness looked too much alike. On Thursday morning, he loaded several worn shirts and a torn coat into a sack and rode into town. The clothes genuinely needed repair, though he knew well enough they could have waited another month. The laundry sat near the back of town beside the creek, steam drifting lazily from its windows. Wade stepped inside and smelled soap and hot cloth. The woman at the counter looked up with immediate curiosity that small-town women carried like a natural talent. "Morning, Mr. Mercer," she said. "Need mending done?" "I do." He set the sack down. "I was told Miss Hart handles sewing." The woman's eyebrows lifted slightly, filing information away for future conversation, and she disappeared upstairs. A minute later, Evelyn descended the narrow staircase. She looked surprised to see him, but not uncomfortable. Up close, Wade noticed how alert her dark eyes were, the cautious look of someone who had learned not to expect much from strangers. "Mr. Mercer," she said politely. "Miss Hart." He pushed the clothes toward her. She inspected the damage quickly and named a fair price without hesitation. Wade agreed at once. She wrote a receipt and handed it over. He took it and remained standing there longer than necessary. Evelyn waited. "There something else?" she asked gently. Wade cleared his throat. Talking had never come easily to him. Doing things made sense. Words often tangled before they reached daylight. "I own a ranch east of town," he said carefully. "Not a large spread, but enough to keep busy." She nodded without speaking. "Since my wife passed, it's been me and my boy handling things." He paused. "Truth is, we've managed, but managing and living ain't always the same thing." Something softened in her expression. "Go on," she said. "I'm short-handed," Wade admitted, "and my cooking ought to be considered a crime against decent food." The faintest smile touched her mouth. "That's serious?" "My son still eats it," Wade said, "though I suspect loyalty has more to do with it than taste." Her smile deepened before she caught herself. Wade found the sight unexpectedly pleasant. "I pay fair wages," he continued. "There's a spare room at the ranch. Cooking, housekeeping, whatever work seems agreeable. No charity involved, strictly employment." Evelyn looked at him steadily. "And why me?" He hesitated. That question had followed him for days. "Because folks say you work hard," he answered honestly. "And because my boy noticed something I did." She understood immediately. "The boardwalk?" "He notices most things." Silence settled between them, not awkward, careful. Evelyn glanced down at the receipt book in her hands. "I'd need to see the place first," she said, "and meet your son proper." Relief moved quietly through Wade, though he hid it beneath a nod. "That seems fair." Saturday arrived bright and windy. Luke waited beside the gate while Wade repaired a hinge near the barn. The boy had asked 3 times whether Miss Hart was truly coming and pretended not to care after the third answer. Around noon, Evelyn arrived in a borrowed wagon carrying little more than curiosity and caution. She wore a simple brown dress and held herself with reserved dignity that Wade respected immediately. Luke watched her approach with the solemn concentration of a judge considering testimony. Evelyn stepped down and looked around the ranch, the fields, the distant cattle, the porch shaded by climbing vines Clara had planted years before. Then she looked at Luke. "Hello again," she said. Luke studied her a long moment. "You don't look lonely today," he said. Wade winced quietly, but Evelyn surprised him. "Not as much," she answered honestly. Luke considered that answer with great seriousness. Then he reached behind his back and produced a crooked handful of wildflowers gathered from the fence line that morning, yellow and purple and already beginning to wilt beneath the Texas sun. He held them out toward her. Wade felt something shift inside his chest while watching. Evelyn accepted the flowers with both hands as though they carried real value. "Thank you," she said softly. Luke nodded once, satisfied, and sat on the porch steps as if the matter had been properly settled. Wade and Evelyn walked the property afterward. He showed her the kitchen, the spare room, the barn, and the small creek where Luke liked to search for smooth stones. They spoke plainly about wages and expectations, neither pretending the arrangement was anything other than practical. Yet as the afternoon faded and Luke followed Evelyn around the yard asking serious questions about sewing needles and Kansas weather, Wade noticed something strange. For the first time in 2 years, the ranch no longer felt entirely silent. And when Evelyn prepared to leave, Luke tugged her sleeve and asked the question neither adult had expected. "If you come here," he said, "will you stay a while?" Evelyn looked at him, then at Wade, and the answer stayed suspended between them like dust floating through late sunlight. Evelyn Hart moved into the spare room 3 days later, beneath a pale October sky that carried the smell of dry grass and distant rain. The arrangement between her and Wade Mercer remained clear and respectful from the beginning. She worked. He paid fair wages. No promises sat between them beyond honesty and decency, and for both of them that felt safest. Yet life had a habit of stepping beyond arrangements when people least expected it. By the end of the first week, the ranch had already changed in quiet ways Wade could not fully explain. The kitchen no longer smelled of burnt biscuits and overcooked beans. Warm bread cooled beside the window. Lamps were lit before darkness settled. Shirts returned to him mended so carefully the repairs nearly disappeared. But it was not the cooking or the order of the house that unsettled Wade most. It was Luke. The boy attached himself to Evelyn with complete and unquestioning certainty. Children did not care much for careful distance. They either trusted or they did not. Luke had decided. And once Luke decided something, arguing with him proved about as useful as arguing with weather. He followed Evelyn through the garden while she gathered herbs, asking endless, serious questions. He sat beside her while she sewed and handed her thread with solemn responsibility. He told her stories about copper, about clouds shaped like cattle, and about the creek behind the pasture where he believed fish carried secrets beneath the water. Most surprising of all, he spoke about Clara. Wade overheard it one evening while repairing tack outside the porch. "Mama liked storms," Luke said while sitting beside Evelyn on the porch steps. She said thunder sounded like heaven-moving furniture. Evelyn smiled gently. "That sounds like something worth remembering." "Pa doesn't talk about her much," Luke added without accusation. Wade froze where he stood. Evelyn did not rush to fill the silence. "Sometimes grown folks carry memories carefully," she said, "like something fragile." Luke considered that. "Do you miss people too?" Her sewing needle paused. "Every day," she answered softly. Wade looked away toward the fading horizon, uncomfortable with how sharply her words landed. Weeks passed. Autumn settled over the ranch. Wade found himself lingering longer at supper, listening while Luke and Evelyn talked about ordinary things that somehow no longer felt ordinary. The heavy silence that had lived inside the house since Clara's death slowly loosened its grip. One evening, Wade returned from repairing fences after sunset and found Evelyn and Luke sitting at the kitchen table, drawing maps of imaginary towns. Luke looked up proudly. "Miss Evelyn says my town needs a sheriff." "Every town needs rules," Evelyn said. Wade removed his hat and sat down without thinking. "Depends on the town," he answered. Luke immediately handed him a pencil. And just like that, without ceremony, Wade became part of the game. Later that night, after Luke had fallen asleep, Wade remained on the porch watching stars emerge across the Texas sky. Evelyn stepped outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one and sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. The wind moved softly through the grass. Coyotes called somewhere beyond the hills. "He's happier," Evelyn said quietly. Wade stared toward the dark pasture. "He is." "So are you." He let out a slow breath. "Maybe." She looked at him. "You don't believe that?" Wade turned the cup between his hands. "Truth is, I got used to surviving." He paused. After Clara died, survival felt like enough. Evelyn remained silent, waiting. "Then you came here," he continued, struggling through words that never obeyed him easily. "And I started noticing the difference between surviving and living." Her gaze lowered to the porch floorboards. "You gave this place peace," he said. "Not just for Luke." She looked up slowly. "Wade, I ain't asking for anything," he said quickly. "Not tonight. Maybe not ever if it's unwelcome. I just needed you to know something honest." The night seemed to hold still around them. "I see what you've done," he said quietly. "And I see you." Evelyn sat very still. For a long moment only the wind answered. Then she smiled, though tears brightened her eyes. "Luke said something to me the first day we met," she said softly. Wade already knew. "You're lonely." She nodded. "I thought about it for weeks." Her voice trembled slightly. "And then he said his pa was better now." Wade looked toward the dark window where Luke slept. "Funny thing is," he admitted, "I didn't know if that was true back then." Evelyn's smile deepened. "And now?" He looked at her beneath the quiet Texas stars. "Now," he said carefully, "I think maybe he saw the truth before I did." She lowered her eyes for a second, then met his gaze again. "I think," she whispered, "he may have seen mine too." They sat there together while Mill Creek slept beneath the enormous sky, not promising forever, not pretending wounds disappeared overnight, only sharing the rare comfort of being understood. And for 2 people who had spent so long carrying sorrow alone, it felt like the beginning of something worth trusting. Somewhere inside the house, Luke turned in his sleep, unaware that the small sentence he had spoken on a boardwalk weeks ago had already begun changing 3 lives forever.